If you've ever seen grain dropping in a bin on a farm or an elevator, this is likely a familiar sight. Today we're going to take a little deeper look. I'm Kevin Curry, and this is a Top Flight Tech Minute. What you're watching here is a simulation of grain falling onto a flat floor of a bin. And if you've ever watched this before, you can understand this is a pretty accurate representation of how the pile actually forms. Today, in this video, I'm going to take you and show you a look inside of how this pile forms and the different structures that happen with the fines and the relationships between the different particles. We're also going to take a look at how these particles affect the airflow inside the bin. The video you're seeing now is actually a cross section, and the colors have been changed to reflect different types of particles. And what you're going to see in this pile is the smaller particles are actually going to congregate in the middle of the pile. And as this pile forms, that same thing is going to happen all the way up to the eave. The smaller particles are going to stay in the middle, and the larger particles are going to slope off. So what you're seeing here is actually called sifting, meaning the smaller particles are going to stay closer to the center. They're going to find little holes between some of the larger particles, and they're not going to slide down the pile. You can see over here, you've got cleaner grain over here, and this is going to happen all the way up to the roof. I'm going to take you over now to the software that actually creates these simulations. This software is called EDEM. It stands for Discrete Element Method. This is how we model these different particles. And this is the actual pile you can see right here. Right now, we're going to take a look at a cross section. This shows the smaller particles in the middle. The black particles are the smallest. They represent the fines. The cyan particles are broken kernels. They're represented in the simulation by these little prisms because broken kernels have kind of a sharp edge, and these little prismatic shapes get stuck in the voids between some of the larger particles. I'm going to take you and show you a couple different views. The orange particles are sort of your large or flat particles. You can tell there are a few spheres put together, but they represent your normal particles. And the yellow particles represent your round particles. This simulation, like I said, is actually a cut in half of the pile. So what you can see here is we're actually looking at the side of a pile. If you look at the other side, you'll just see the large particles. You can't actually see into the pile, and it's the same thing in a bin. So by looking in this software, we're actually able to see something that we couldn't ever see in a bin, even with all the dirt and dust and all the other, the fact that it's so dark in there. And as this pile forms, like I said, this is going to continue to show on up. And these particles, these small particles, are congregating in the middle. And if you don't believe me, just take a look underneath. That's the bottom of the pile right there. And you can see how small of an area these smaller particles occupy. The problem here is that air is not going to flow in these small areas. Air is going to flow out here where you have more space between the particles. Air takes the path of least resistance. And if you have a greater amount of particles hiding in between these spaces, the air is not going to be able to make its way through these areas. We call this, in some of our research that we've done and some university research, they call this the air bypass effect. Meaning, if air can't get through this area, it's going to trap excess heat from drying. And that excess heat is going to trap excess moisture from drying. It's not going to cool as fast. And these areas, as they lock on and they hold that heat maybe for several days or weeks, these are going to become a breeding ground for microbial activity. And that is going to create a couple issues. Number one, you're going to have a lot harder time unloading this section of the bin is not going to unload as easily because you're going to have sticking, heat. It's going to be more densely packed because of all these fines being present in here. You're also going to have your initial loads are going to be higher in BCFM. That's broken corn foreign material. And that BCFM will represent a lot of times on larger bins will represent some dockage on some of your initial loads. The other issue here is that when you have higher concentrations of foreign material, that's where most of your aflatoxin is going to be. So if you're going to get a dockage for aflatoxin or vomitoxin or any other, toxins that get tested for, a lot of times they're going to be higher in your foreign material. So if you can spread that foreign material out, you're going to get to a lower threshold where you probably won't get to be a level that is a dockage for you. The other big thing is your sump, your center sump is literally right here. This is the true center of the bin right here. So your center sump is right below all this mess of fines and broken corn and the place where you've had no airflow. So right where you need the highest quality grain, the best airflow, you want when you pull those sumps, you want the best grain to flow into that sump. And it's the opposite when you pile fill. You have the most amount of fines, the least amount of airflow, the highest chance for microbial activity, the densest layers. So the possibility of you opening those sumps and grain either not coming out or flowing for a little while and then not coming out is really high. And I'm going to show you this in one other way right here. This is looking from above, and you can see that cross section that we talked about earlier. And I'm going to actually show you, if I can get lined up here. There's the fines. So these are the smallest particles. And you can see, compared to the pile, these are occupying a pretty small footprint with that pile. And then if we take the broken kernels out, they occupy a little bit larger area, which actually gives credence to the fact that the larger the particles are, the more likely they are to ride these convection currents out away from the center. I'll turn those broken kernels off again. And you can see just the difference right there and how much more concentrated the fines are in this center area. We did some research a few months ago, and we actually found out through some testing we did in the field and some airflow models that we ran based on these simulations that the core of the bin actually has 67% less airflow. We actually found some studies from some universities that claim that the airflow in the core of a bin is actually the word they used was negligible, which I could believe, but for the sake of argument, we kept our fine concentration on what we would consider the lower end of some of the research that we did and some of the research that we looked at from other studies, but we found that 67% less airflow in the core. So why are we talking about this? Why is this concentration of fines in the middle a big deal? We already talked about all the things that can happen, the dockage, flowability issues, so on and so forth. But is there an alternative option? And there is. If we spread the grain as we fill this bin, we can take this fines mass and we can spread it out over the entire surface of the bin floor or most of the bin floor. So I'm going to show you right now a spreader that we make, and this is a clip, a similar simulation, but running a spreader. So this is our spreader running. And again, this is a video. We always get a smoother playback when we show a video. And I know a lot of people have had issues with spreaders, and there's a reason we designed this spreader, and it's mostly for those issues. In a future video, we're going to go over the mechanics of our grain spreader and what we think makes it different, and some of the other aspects and adjustability of the spreader. But for right now, I want to show you the fines and how they're distributed over the surface of the floor. The results you see here are pretty consistent with what we get in the real world. We've also used the same colors in the simulation. So those cyan colored particles that we used in the other simulation, we're still using here. And it may look like a lot, but this is 1.5% corn material in this simulation, which is pretty average for corn, or maybe even a little bit light. I'm going to back up so that we can take a look at the actual size of the spreader. And I'm going to pause it right here. This model that you see right here is our 6,000 bushel an hour spreader. The chute on this spreader right here, or what we refer to as the fan board, is 60 inches. So this is a 6,000 bushel an hour, 60 inch. That's our 6K60. We make a couple other sizes. We make a 1390. I make a 20K spreader. This model right here is running at about 80% of its capacity. This is a 42-foot bin in this simulation. We can cover the flashing in a 60-footer. Usually a 60-footer is a little bit taller, so there's a little bit more fall time, and we can actually cover the flashing in a 60-foot bin. We've done that in the real world. But for what you're seeing right here, this is a 42-foot bin. And what you'll see is these cyan-colored fines, these smaller particles, are being carried out away from the center of the bin. So the way our spreader works is we have a couple of fins on the fan board. We have the first fin right here we call our redirect. So it actually takes some of the grain that's moving down and out, and it actually reverses the flow back to the center. We don't just punch a hole in the middle of the spreader and let grain pile up in the center. We actually reverse the flow and spread it back onto the center of the floor. What this is going to do is it's going to give us a consistent pattern of fines and broken kernels and whole kernels all across the floor. So our airflow is going to be consistent all the way across the profile of this floor. We did some testing last year with a customer who had temp cables in bins, and they had 3 bins in a row. They had spreaders in 2 and no spreader in the 3rd bin. And they found that in those 2 bins, they were able to turn the fans off 3.5 days sooner because the cores were cool at the same time as the periphery of the grain. So that's some real world data. We then took that data back and we did some airflow modeling, and we did some calculations to see if the fines were concentrated in this circle or in this circle or in the whole bin, what would the clean corn factor be? And we actually were able mathematically to show the same results. So we feel like we have some really good test data there, and we've seen that data show up in other university studies as well. We did a whole white paper on this subject, and if you're interested in that, reach out and we'll get you a copy. I'm going to show you now a photo. This is that same photo, but what you're looking at here is everything's been hidden except for the fines. The spreader itself has been hidden. All the larger particles have been hidden. Everything except for these small particles. And you can see how this spreader tends to take these particles and direct them away from the center. And the same thing that happens in the pile formation actually happens on the spreader. Those small particles actually sift to the bottom, and they actually wind up landing on the fan board itself, and then they pick up some energy from the larger particles, and they're pushed from the center out into the periphery of the bin. So what you're seeing here is actually what really happens. There's no centrifugal bias on this spreader. And what that means is if you have a high-speed spreader, meaning a spreader that's like a fan type spreader where it's really spinning at a high RPM, what those spreaders tend to do is they push the larger particles out to the walls because they have more inertia. So those particles can carry further and land all the way out the walls, while the fines don't have the same amount of inertia. So they end up landing closer to the center of the bin. But with our spreader, we're not using speed to get our spread pattern. We're using the flow of grain to get our spread pattern. And by entraining these fines and broken kernels in that stream of grain, we're able to carry them further out. This is a clip from the video playback you saw a couple seconds ago. This shows you a more detailed look at the fins and how they actually split the stream. This is not what this actual spreader looks like. This is a simulation model. So the drive group and the mounting assembly have all been hidden to speed up the simulation process. If you'd like to see the actual spreader, there's a link in the description to our info page. If you go there, you'll find the videos of it running in bins, some photos, the white pages we talked about. All the resources are on that page. So check that out. If this is something that you think can add value to your operation, or if you're a bin dealer to one of your customers' operations, feel free to get a hold of us and we'll talk to you about your specific application and your needs. Thanks for watching the video. I'm Kevin Curry with Top Flight. We'll talk to you soon.